This video documents some trials of a long-wavelength infrared microbolometer, essentially a thermal video camera, for detection of platypus and rakali in small and moderate-sized waterways. It's the first of 3 videos based on testing on 11th to 12th and 17th to the 19th of October 2025. This first video exhaustively documents all the significant events detected on the nights of 11th to 12th and 17th to the 18th of October. The second video documents the next night, and the third video, which will be much shorter, will just show the highlights. We're showing every event for these first 2 videos just to emphasize the potential of these thermal sensors for platypus, rakali, and other nocturnal fauna detection, including bats, in conjunction with simultaneous ultrasonic sound recording. The camera used in these tests is based on an uncooled vanadium oxide sensor with 640 by 512 pixel resolution with a 12 micron square pixel size, recording at 25 frames per second through a 9mm focal length germanium and glass lens. Custom code developed by OCSN runs on a Raspberry Pi single board computer to operate the sensor and continuously capture encoded video upscaled to 1280 by 1024 resolution. White indicates hotter temperatures. Automatic exposure scaling is enabled so that the hottest pixels in each frame are pure white. Everything cooler than that is progressively darker shades of grey. Before we look at some waterways, first is a test sequence captured with a thermal camera from the veranda of an OCSN member's house in Chatham Valley, about 12 kilometres south of Oberon Township in the New South Wales Central Tablelands. Elevation is about 1,200 metres above sea level. For scale, the gate shown in the centre top of the frame is about 60 metres away from the camera. If you look carefully, you can even see the warm footprints left by the wombat as it crosses the lawn. The first thermal video was recorded at the junction of the Upper Duckmalloy River and Yallabelly Creek. The setting and the cameras are shown in the next visible light video sequence with captions. Near-infrared illumination at 850 nanometer wavelength was used to enable video recording with the Sony IMX585 sensor as well as a thermal sensor. The near-infrared illumination has no effect on the thermal images shown after that. Here is the junction of Yallabelly Creek, which flows into the Duckmalloy River. The near-infrared and thermal cameras can be seen at the junction. This is the section of Yallabelly Creek shown in the thermal images which follow. It's about 1 metre wide at this point. At about 6:40 p.m. we see a platypus descend from Yallabelly Creek and enter the Duckmalloy. Watch carefully for the 2 glowing eyes. An hour later, at about 7:35 p.m, a second platypus descends from Yallabelly Creek into the Duckmalloy River. Watch again for the 2 glowing eyes. And 10 minutes later, a third platypus descends from Yallabelly Creek into the Duckmalloy River. Carefully watch the left-hand side of the creek channel. Nothing else was observed during the night on the thermal camera until about 5:40 a.m. the next morning, when we see a platypus pause briefly before ascending upstream into Yellowbelly Creek, presumably to return to its burrow there, having fed all night along the Duckmalloy River. Finally, about 10 minutes later at 5:40 a.m., we see a second platypus ascend Yellowbelly Creek. This one is very elusive. You can briefly see one bright eye on the left side of the channel. The preceding sequences demonstrate the utility of the thermal sensor to detect platypus in shallow riffles, such as turbulent water over rocks. Future trials will endeavour to capture simultaneous thermal and near-infrared video to confirm platypus appearance in thermal imaging, but there is little doubt that these are platypus being observed here. Next, we test the thermal camera on a much wider stretch of the Duckmalloy River, about 300 metres upstream from the previous location. Here the river is about 8 to 10 metres wide and about 2 metres deep in the middle of the channel. For orientation and annotated still, the thermal image is shown next. The following thermal video clips show all events involving mammals or birds in some cases on the night of the 17th to 18th of October 2025. No artificial illumination of any kind was used. There are nearly 50 clips from this one night on this one stretch of the upper Duckmalloy River. First we see a bat flying above the water, flying towards the camera, then away from it, heading downstream. Its head is warm, showing up white, but its wings, which are skin with little or no blood supply, are cool and therefore dark. Note that you can even see the reflection of its hot head in the water as it flies along. There's a slow motion replay to follow. In the next segment, at about 8:20 p.m, we see two ducks, one near the camera, the other further downstream. But keep watching the left-hand bank. A platypus appears and heads towards the camera position before diving. An hour later, a platypus heads downstream. Keep watching, it dives and surfaces twice more. "15 minutes later, at 9:39 p.m., a platypus swims towards the camera. Next, we see a platypus apparently emerge from the far bank at the top center of the frame. There may be a burrow there with the entrance just below the water level. In this next segment, apart from the wombat in the upper right of the frame, we see a platypus surfacing in the upper middle of the frame and gliding across the width of the river. Next, at 10:52 p.m., a platypus appears on the upper right of the frame near the far bank. It's possible that it emerged from a burrow. Just 1 minute later, a rakali appears at the upper right of the frame and swims and dives along the far bank, heading downstream. Its appearance is quite different to a platypus on thermal camera. Its head is hotter and it's held out of the water. It swims differently and the curve of its back when diving can be easily seen. It also dives for briefer periods than a platypus and tends to hug the bank, which is rakali behavior that we have observed consistently in previously recorded near-infrared videos. In this next sequence, starting at about 11:30 p.m., we see ducks cluster on the near bank, about 30 metres downstream from the camera, in the upper left of the frame. Watch carefully just to the right of where the ducks are gathered, and you'll see a rakali heading upstream, about 40 metres away from the camera. It heads for the far bank and proceeds upstream. How are we certain that it is a rakali? Just keep watching. Continuing this sequence, the rakali re-enters the water and it appears to chase and harass the ducks. At this point, the rakali has swum out of the frame towards the near bank, close to where the ducks have been gathered all night. About 45 seconds later, something spooks the ducks. Clearly it's the rakali, which proceeds to chase several ducks across the river before swimming upstream along the near bank right past the thermal camera. About 15 minutes after the rakali versus ducks incident at 11:52 p.m, a platypus crosses the river from the far bank, quite close to the camera. About a minute later, a platypus, probably the same one, re-enters the frame at the bottom right, heading downstream. Keep watching after it dives. It reappears in the upper left of the frame, close to the near bank, about 10 or 15 metres downstream from the camera. About an hour later, at around 1 a.m, a platypus appears to emerge from the far bank in the middle of the top of the frame, and then swims upstream. Is this the same place as the earlier time when a platypus seemed to emerge from the bank? We'll check after this. Here's a close-up replay. Also note the wombat feeding in the upper right of the frame. Here's the earlier clip of a platypus possibly emerging from a burrow, but no, it isn't the same place. In the next segment, about 5 minutes later at 1:05 a.m, a platypus surfaces in the upper left of the frame near where the ducks have congregated, and it heads upstream towards the camera, creating a characteristic platypus V wave before diving. Five minutes later, at 1:10 a.m, we see a platypus either surface near the far bank, in the upper middle of the frame, or emerge from a burrow in the bank. It's within a metre or two of the previous possible burrow emergences, suggesting that there is a burrow there. We can investigate that at a later date using near-infrared cameras, which can see 15 to 20 centimetres into the water. 2 minutes later, it seems like yet another platypus surfaces in the same vicinity of the far bank, possibly yet more evidence for a burrow there. About 30 minutes later, at 1:37 a.m., we see a platypus surface in the middle of the river channel and head towards the near bank, circling once as it does so before going out of view. Then a few minutes later, it comes back into view and swims towards the camera before diving. Keep watching the lower right of the frame. You will see its thermal wake as it surfaces just out of the frame. Seven minutes later, at 1:49 a.m., a platypus surfaces mid-channel and then swims upstream along the near bank, right past the camera position. Then a few minutes later, a platypus, probably the same one, heads back downstream, right below the camera position. Next, about 5 minutes later, at 2:11 a.m., a platypus appears in the upper right of the frame and appears to disappear into the far bank at exactly the same place where we suspected a burrow earlier. Almost certainly there's a burrow there. About 20 minutes later, at 2:25 a.m., a platypus appears on the left of the frame from the near bank and swims upstream before diving just in front of the camera. The next segment, starting at 2:35 a.m., is initially somewhat confusing. Either a platypus or a rakali appears at the upper right, swims along the far bank, diving and fairly quickly resurfacing several times, suggesting that it might be a rakali. Then it swims across the river channel and it becomes clearer that it is a rakali. Its thermal appearance is somewhat different to a platypus, with much more of the length of its body radiating heat above the waterline. Then, at 2:56 a.m., a platypus swims into view at the lower right of the frame, heading downstream along the near bank before diving. About 11 minutes later, we see a platypus, probably the same one, head back upstream along the near bank, again passing right in front of the camera. In the next three segments, we first see a platypus appear at the upper right of the frame and swim downstream in the middle of the river channel, creating a characteristic V wave. You can even see the thermal signature of the wave. Next, we see a platypus apparently emerge from the far bank in the same vicinity of the suspected burrow. It swims across the channel to the near bank. Then about 5 minutes later, it appears again and swims upstream in front of the camera, leaving a beautiful thermal plume behind it. In the next two segments, at 4:41 a.m. and 4:57 a.m., we see a bat swoop over the water and appear to get a drink. Note the reflection of the bat's hot head in the water. Then we see a wombat at the upper right of the frame feeding on the grass on the far bank. In this next segment, starting at 5:05 a.m., something scares the congregation of ducks near the near bank in the upper left of the frame. Keep watching and it becomes clear what it is. You can see a rakali appear and circle, prowling around the ducks. Maybe it's after a duckling. The resolution is not quite good enough to absolutely conclude this is a rakali. It could be a platypus, but the swimming motion seems to be more like a rakali, and platypus seem far less likely to harass ducks than a rakali. Next, at 5:15 a.m., we see a platypus appear at the upper right of the frame and swim down the far bank, diving twice to feed. In the next two segments, at 5:19 a.m. and 5:24 a.m., we see a wombat feeding on the far bank, and then a bat swoop over the river with a quarter-speed slow-motion repeat because the bat is very fast. Once again, note the thermal reflection of the bat's warm head in the surface of the water. At 5:49 a.m., a platypus heads straight downstream, not diving to feed and leaving a lovely V-wave thermal plume. It may be hurrying home before dawn. After it disappears from view, keep watching the right side of the frame about a third of the way down from the top. It appears to be a large trout with a clear thermal signature against the river water temperature. At 5:55 a.m., the congregation of ducks decamp from where they have spent the night, just out of frame on the upper left, and head off downstream. There do indeed appear to be some ducklings. The final two sequences at 5:58 a.m. and 6:25 a.m. show further platypus movements. There were two more instances of what were probably platypus movements further downstream between these two segments, but they were quite hard to discern and have thus been omitted from this video. That concludes the first of three videos documenting results from the first trial of a medium-resolution long-wavelength infrared thermal camera for detection and surveillance of platypus, rakali and other fauna in a wider river channel. Part 2 will document the findings on the subsequent night at a slightly different camera position slightly downstream. If you'd like to find out more, or if you'd like to support our work, please visit our website at oberon-citizen.science.